Hey everybody!
Friends. We're back for another What We Read
That's
episode.
right.
Today, I do not have a theme except to say that they're mostly series books. Mostly. There's one exception, but sort of still counts in some way. So I guess we're just gonna get right to it.
That's right.
I'm gonna talk about a series that I borrowed from the library and I read with my friends Rachel from Hello Chelly and DJ from This Life in Fiction.
Here we go.
The series in question is the Sweet series by Wendy Higgins, and there are 3 books in it. Sweet
Yes.
Evil, Sweet Peril, and Sweet Reckoning. The Sweet series is like a slightly older YA urban fantasy paranormal romance type series. The first book introduces us to the main players in this game. There's Anna, who is our main character, and she discovers very early on in the book that she is actually a Nephilim, and in that story, unlike in the Shadowhunters world, which it means something completely different there, in this story, when you're Nephilim, that means you're the daughter of a fallen angel and a human, or
Wow.
as in Anna's case, and this is mildly spoilery, but it's basically introduced pretty early on in the story, she's the daughter of a fallen angel and a guardian angel.
Interesting.
So it makes her slightly different from all the other Nephilim. She hasn't really understood or been taught about her heritage until she hits the age of like 16, 15, when she encounters another Nephilim for the first time, and his name is Kaiden Rowe. Once she meets him, things start to kind of unravel as she discovers what her real heritage is, what it really means to be a Nephilim, and then she starts learning more about this world that she's never known about. It turns out the fallen angels are not down in hell. There are actually 12 of them who are on Earth, and they are called dukes, and they're assigned to different sins.
That's right, the Dukes
And
of
their
Hell.
children inherit that burden of sin, and they're also supposed to be working, so they have to convince humans to indulge in that sin. I'll leave it at that, but suffice to say there is a prophecy that pushes the series forward where the life and the future of the Nephilim race and these 12 fallen angels could be changed by someone special, and you can kind of guess who is the someone special in the series. The first book was enjoyable. I think it felt very much like a setup to me because I was learning so much about like what the Nephilim were like in this world, what it really meant. I was kind of getting to know Anna and Kaiden and all of these other people. I enjoyed it, but I was also like, feels very setupy. This feels very much like a first book in a series. I kind of am interested in it, but I also am like fine. Like it was fine. But then the second and third books were really interesting and really good because they took this lore and they just kind of like pushed it into places that I wasn't expecting. It was definitely a lot darker than I was anticipating because there is a lot of this different kinds of sin being like happening in this book. Murder, there's adultery, there's overindulgence in substances, there's lust, like there's so many dark aspects to it, and they really have to push the limits of that. It is another kind of chosen one story, but I thought the lore was interesting enough to make it very accessible and different and like fun for me to read, and I really ended up liking all of the characters, not just Anna and Kaiden, but everyone else who ends up involved in this story. It was really fun to read the second book and to see how like things start to open up, like the world gets bigger, which happens a lot in series of course, but it was impressive just to see like where she decided to take it. Very entertaining. And then the third book felt like such a good finale, even though I do think that the climactic part of it was a little bit too short for my liking, but like I also can't fathom her stretching it out any other way. It was very fun for me. I'm glad I finally got the chance to read it. I'm so glad this paranormal book club is making me read things that I normally would not have picked up for myself. And then another one I read digitally is Empire of Dreams, which is by Ray Carson. This is the one I said was like a single book, but it kind of makes sense because it's a spin-off from another series called the Fire and Thorn series. So this is about a character named Red Sparklestone, and she is supposed to be adopted by the Empress, except that gets thwarted because of these political people who don't want her to get adopted. And so to prove herself, she decides to join sort of like the Queen's Guard, the guards, and train there, which is something that almost all royal heirs do. And so she has to prove herself in the guard. While she's there, they actually uncover a conspiracy against the kingdom, and she has to figure out a way to save her prince, who's like her brother basically, and the kingdom from falling apart. You know what? I really enjoyed this book. It reminded me so much of a Tamara Pierce story because Red basically reminds me of Alana Ankel because she's just that headstrong. She's also like, I'm not gonna let any boys get the best of me. I'm gonna kick their asses. Which she does. To be fair to her, she freaking does it.
That works.
It's a murder mystery sort of. It's kind of like political intrigue, but also a little bit of murder in there. And it's fun to just be back in this world and to have a different character perspective in it. And I wasn't sure what Ray Carson was going to do with the spin-off, but the way she chose to tell it is actually something that ended up being surprisingly appealing to me. Worked very well as like a standalone spin-off. And I would definitely recommend checking it out. Whether or not you're a fan of the Fire and Thorn series, I think you could read it. It would hit you different if you were a fan, because then you'd see all these like references that you probably would have missed otherwise, and they'll just hit you in the feels. But It was really fun. I really enjoyed reading that one, and I am very glad that they decided to do that spin-off story.
This is part 2 of my comic binge. I'm gonna start with Team Avatar Tales. Team Avatar Tales is basically sort of like another sort of like tales from like, you know, the Avatar world. It's some of them are just like 1 page, or some of them are 2, 3 pages. They're all just a series of short stories or short graphic sort of like cartoon strips.
Yeah.
Of basically the Avatar gang. So if you're a huge fan, this is a great addition to the shelf. If you're not a super fan, I don't know that you're gonna want to stick around for the couple of gems that are in there. But there are a couple, so recommend that if you want to slug through it, if you want to risk it. But if you're sort of like a casual Avatar fan, then might want to spend your money on maybe like the other like let's say for example, The Hunt for Zuko's Mom.
Oh yeah,
like, that was great. The other couple of books that I read are actually Teen Titans 2 and Titans Volume 3, both in the Rebirth series. Now I'm gonna start with Teen Titans 2 because it sort of finally ties in sort of like Aqualad's story. And by Aqualad, I don't mean Garth. I mean the new Aqualad that was also the Aqualad first maybe introduced in, I want to say, the Young Justice TV series, where you've got a guy named Calder, and he's kind of you know, like he's black and he's got like really cool blonde hair. He's a waterbender. That's a terrible way to put it, but he has that power in him that allows him to control sort of water. I want to say Aquamancer, and he decides to sort of come out with his powers and say, I'm out. And so he goes to Titan's Tower. Damien is in charge of this team, and I still can't stand him.
I don't think he would be that.
He's an imperious little jerk, and the one good thing that I can say about this piece, because I'm not a huge Damian Wayne fan, unlike this one, but Damien is Damien is running the Titans ragged, you know, working them very, very hard. He's a terrible taskmaster, and with Aqualad sort of being, with his own parentage finally revealed, sort of realizes that, you know, you and I have daddy issues and we're taking it out on our real lives.
Oh, really? Would never happen.
Right? I mean, and Damien is like, yeah, I'm above that crap. And he's like, no, you're not. You're trying to impress the bat. So there are a lot of shining moments. I didn't expect to like it because Damien's in charge. I did not like the first book. But this is the other half of Super Sons after all. He's a little bit more unhinged with his team because there's no John Kent to sort of balance him out. But I like that Aqualad is here to sort of like,
maybe Aqualad will do it.
Draw it out of him. And then Titans Volume 3, called A Judas Among Us. There is a traitor among the Titans. So the Titans have recently reformed. Wally West is back, all that kind of deal. Don is there, and Garth, and everybody's there. And they're like, there is a traitor among us. Who would that be? I'm not gonna reveal who it is because that's kind of the point. But in my head,
like a fun plot, though.
But it is. But in my head, I'm just like, you know,
is it obvious to you?
It's both like my favorite and not my favorite. That's like that's the kind of cognitive dissonance I have with the Titans Rebirth team, because I finally have everyone I love in the same team all over again. But they're recovering from the universe being shuffled back and forth into what it is now, and for them to go into this whole, well, there's a traitor again. Who? And then when they figure that out, they do it in the most Titansy way. There's a little gray area between like, oh my god, like that is so on brand, and yeah, that's not a compliment. There's a gray area. There's a gray area in between that. And that's where I would mark A Judas Among Us.
Fair. Because
they've done that before. There was a traitor, and it was crazy. They made a movie out of it. It was fine. This time, what is going on? Still, if you love the Titans like I do, just grab it. It's all you can get these days.
So, since you're talking about DC stuff, I will talk about something DC that I also finished reading recently.
Yes, very fun.
So,
very
I read the first trilogy from Gotham Academy, which is by Becky Cloonan, Brendan Fletcher, and I think Carl Kerschel is the illustrator. So, the first one is called Welcome to Gotham Academy, the second one is Calamity, and the third one is Yearbook. I really enjoyed this trilogy. It's fun for me. It is set in the Gothamverse, but at Gotham Academy, so you're kind of outside of like everything else going on with the Bat and everything. Like, Batman makes an appearance, but he's always like on the peripheral, like he's never really actually involved, because this is about a set of teens who are at Gotham Academy, and they are all there under very specific circumstances, but none more so than the main character, Olive. She in particular was actually brought to the Academy by Bruce Wayne for reasons that you find out when you read the graphic novels. I remember really enjoying the first one, and that's what convinced me to immediately read the second one. I really like it because it's the story of these, like, they're very precocious teenagers is what I want to say. They all have very specific interests, and they get into shenanigans because of said interests. Even Olive, who doesn't want to be brought into these shenanigans. It really centers around Olive, these first two especially. You find out more about a summer incident that she can't remember anything about, and also why she's at Gotham Academy. And in the second book, you find out more about her parentage. So that's interesting as well. The third book is also very enjoyable, but unlike the other two, it feels more like exactly what it says on the tin, a yearbook. So it's like stories from their year at Gotham Academy. Like, it's a variety of different situations that they find themselves in, ranging from stuff like playing pranks at school, or a Dungeons and Dragons game that they came up with, or this really lucid dream. It's like a bunch of random scenarios tossed into like one trade paperback, and it was enjoyable because I love the characters, so I'm just like, the more you give me, the better it'll feel. So that part was really fun to me, and I really like that. But actually, it's probably my least favorite of the first trilogy. I think my favorite has to be the first book, just because watching everyone come together and like become this like team, it's great. I really enjoy it. It's a really fun way to like spend an afternoon just like absorbing the story, and the art is also especially fun. It's very cohesive in these two volumes. In this one, it's like a mix of artists because the different issues were done by different artists, which was really fun as well. I will say one of my favorite things about this series is that other than Batman, there is another Bat Family character who makes an appearance more than once, and it is the greatest like moment of my life.
It's the only reason I want to read it, because
it's adorable and it's wonderful, and I'm glad I finally read it. And then I finally finished a series that I've been meaning to finish since last year, and that is the Shades of Magic series. So this is book 2, A Gathering of Shadows. This is book 3, A Conjuring of Light. The Shades of Magic series begins with a darker shade of magic, and it is about a man named Kel who can travel between the 4 different Londons. There's Red London, White London, Black London, and Grey London. And so he is the only one who has the ability as an Antari to travel between these Londons.
Awesome.
On most of his trips. He carries artifacts from one London to the other, which is technically illegal, but he does it anyway, because like he's the only one who can. Anyway, on one of these trips, he's about to take an artifact back with him, but someone steals it from him and he has to go and get it back. And this starts his relationship with a young woman named Delilah Bard, and she and he kind of get involved in this thing that threatens to end the existence of some of the Londons as they know it, with this plague-like thing. It's a lot. The first book was really fun and enjoyable, and it's actually quite a solid standalone story. Like, you could read it and you could end there and it would be fine. But if you read the second and third books, you kind of see the ripple effect of something that happens at the very end of that first book. And it's, oh my gosh, I was so surprised by how interesting it turned out to be for me. It's not necessarily the most new and inventive fantasy I've ever read, because a lot of it is like tropes you might have seen in other fantasy things. Not necessarily books even, maybe TV shows, maybe like other forms of media. But just because it's set in this such interesting world and has this great magic system, and because Victoria Schwab gives you characters like who are insanely awesome and just fun to read about, of course I ended up enjoying this book because I was very invested in these characters. The second book in particular is probably my favorite because it actually has a background tournament set up, and I am a sucker for tournament stories. Okay, tournament stories are like my jam, especially in a fantasy setting. And in this one, because the magic is so elemental based for all of them, it was like watching Avatar at a tournament, which is great. I really enjoyed these two books. I think the conclusion was really good too, because it wraps things up very, very well. Not necessarily happy about everything that happened to everyone in this book, because it was very hard to read sometimes, but it was really fun. I'm glad I finally read the series. I'm glad I can say definitively this is my favorite V. Schwab like series so far. And then we're gonna quickly talk about my new favorite series of all time. If you know me at all, and if you watch this channel long enough, you probably already know like I'm anime trash in general. Particularly if it's a shoujo fantasy anime. Oh, yeah. My all-time favorite anime is Fushigi Yugi. If you know anything about Fushigi Yugi, then you'll probably understand why the Shadow of the Fox trilogy is one of my all-time favorite book series now. We have Shadow of the Fox, Soul of the Sword, and Night of the Dragon. It basically centers around a half-human, half-kitsune named Yumeko. When her temple, the temple she lives at, is attacked, she is tasked by the monks at the temple to bring a piece of this very important scroll to another temple. And so she has to do it in order to basically save the world as she knows it. On her way there, she encounters this shadow warrior named Kage Tatsumi, and she manages to coerce him into being her escort to this temple, even though he's also technically after that scroll that she's supposed to be carrying with her. This whole journey ensues that takes them all around their version of Japan, where they gather allies, they gather clues, they visit sites that are important, and then it ends with this banging conclusion. It's just so good. The build-up from book 1 all the way to book 3, it's so good. It pays off so well. It is a very solid fantasy fantasy read, whether or not you're an anime fan, if you're a fantasy fan, you will enjoy it because it is so interesting and so immersive. A lot of Japanese lore is obviously used in it and culture as well. And for me, because I'm familiar with a lot of it because of the animes, it's not as hard for me to keep a grasp on. But I will say, like, I think in general, you probably will have a good idea of what Julie Kagawa is referring to, because she does go out of her way to kind of make an effort to explain the context of like what a creature is, or what kind of magic this is, or what the cultural like relationship of like this term or whatever it is in the story. It's so entertaining, it's so much fun. You will love these characters. Like Yumeko and Tatsumi and their allies are so near and dear to my heart, and they're the reason why this entire series has now become a favorite for me. Like, Maki can attest to this. He was there when I was binge reading this entire series and like having all the feels. All of the feels. So if you have not yet read the series, now is the great time to binge since the third book just came out. So there, those are all the books we're talking about in today's What We Read. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you've read any of the books and comics that we talked about, feel free to shout us out in the comments below. And just for funsies, if you're a DC fan, which character is your favorite? Can be anyone.
That's gonna be hard. That's a hard question. Top 5.
Top 5 is fine, because then I can just say all the Robins. Just kidding. But also it's true.
Mine are a mixed bag of Batgirls and Robins, so.
Anyway, we hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll be back with another one next week. Bye!